All right. But here we go. Week 13. You all aren't superstitious, are you?
No.
You know, this is actually week 14. We just didn't number the first one, right?
And we skipped one.
Oh, we skip. Oh, we call everything. We call all of it. All right, number one. Out of the post-flood peoples come trouble, and his name is Nimrod. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. You ever called somebody a Nimrod
Yes,
before?
always.
I've never tried
Did
that.
you ever mean that in the nicest way?
I've never said
I
that.
said it in a humorous way.
In a humorous way?
Yeah.
Normally, we don't mean it in a very nice way, do we?
But not really even thinking about what it means.
Right. Well, we say a lot of things like that. But listen, typically when we use the term Nimrod, we're talking, we're meaning it as an insult to someone. That's how it's used in our culture. And it's used as someone that's not very bright.
We always said, didn't we?
But Nimrod, do I? Nimrod was not stupid, no, and so we misapply the name in our culture. We're going to talk about it.
Nimrod, I guess that's.
Genesis 10, 8 through 10. This is what we read. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom, and notice it says his kingdom, was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and in the land of Shinar. Right? So, Nimrod, there's attention is coming to this one man. And we have to ask ourselves, anytime we're reading in the scriptures, when we come to a passage like this, why is it that God has seemed to bring special attention to this person? That's a legitimate question, don't you think? A lot of times we'll be reading and we kind of skip names because sometimes those Old Testament names are hard, aren't they? There's a reason. It's a different language. But let me share this with you. It's just a little help. As you're reading, it doesn't always matter if you say the name exactly right. But say it the same way every time for your understanding. Okay? And so when you come to it, don't try to give it 20 different pronunciations. Just say it the same way every time. Alright, so here we're told Nimrod is a mighty hunter, a mighty man, and that's kind of what his name means. But the beginning of his kingdom, that's an interesting statement, isn't it? It's pointing, it's directing us in this area that Nimrod is going to have influence over. Remember we talked about those dispensations, the law of the house, and how God operates within each one. And we said the third one that began after the flood of Noah, when they come off, God establishes the third dispensation, the law of the house. And, the human government. Dispensation means law of the house. But he establishes the third dispensation of human government. And it's in response to what took place in the second dispensation, where everyone did according to their own will, where they did what they thought was right, and there was nothing to hem them in, to keep them from hurting one another and doing these awful things. But now, it gives us the idea that there's something more to human government, and Nimrod is behind it. Now bear with me because there's some other things. There's a pattern that will develop here. And we have to jump to some other passages in the Bible. Number 2, all forms of paganism can be traced back to the time of Genesis 11 and Nimrod. paganism. If somebody was going to define paganism, how would you define paganism today?
Somebody do.
Anything but God? Okay.
You know, we have a pagan festival in Park Circle.
I know.
You saw?
Yeah, we were here for it.
Oh,
We didn't go to. We saw the band.
But paganism is the worship of other gods, okay? That's in general terms, right? And so it can all be traced back to Genesis 11 and Nimrod. Because up until this time, there really wasn't a centralized form of worship other than God being observed, God being acknowledged. We see nothing else in Genesis 1 through 10 that would suggest to us that there were lots of other religious ideas. Let's go to the book of Revelation. We're going to jump ahead a little bit, okay?
Way back.
Look at this. Revelation 17, 1 through 5. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, and this is one of the judgments that will be poured out in the future. He said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. And with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and earth's abomination." All right, there's a lot of symbolism here. This is common through the book of Revelation, this type of writing. And what we're going to see when we get there, but we'll see some of it tonight, is that there is a system that will be established and has already been established because there's a pattern that goes back to Nimrod that looks to blend together both political and religious ideologies. And the idea is that if you can pull people from a political spectrum and a religious spectrum into one group, then there's this idea that you'll have unity. Anybody ever heard of United Nations?
Yeah.
You ever heard of the idea of one world nation?
Yes.
One world order, that's another term. And so, and that right now within our country, and it has been, we talk about the separation of church and state, right? And there's even more to that, but really, we see this great divide among people. And so, in Revelation 17, it's looking at the religious form where in the future that follows the same pattern that goes back to Nimrod, is that there will be this religious aspect that will be pulled in to appeal to people, to get them to come together in order for all of humanity and all the world to be better. Let me remind you of the song, "We Are the World." And everybody comes together, and can't we all just get along, and everything's grand, and we all have the same belief, and we all have, your God may be named this, and my God may be named that, and we all have the same God, and that's just foolish. But yet, that's the idea. Let me point out a couple other things here. This woman that it talks about, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and jewels, pearls. The woman is a form of religion. And some believe it's a particular church, a particular denomination. We can't prove that. But varying ideas. But we do know that this is talking about religious ideas. And the purple and scarlet and all these things, there is a sense of wealth to this religious body. And when we look at things like the abominations and impurities of sexual immorality, normally when we use those terms, people automatically go to something physical. But sexual immorality, sexual adultery, does not begin in the physical realm. It is first and foremost a spiritual act. We can go to the Old Testament and we can see the teachings of the different prophets like Hosea. Hosea, the first 3 chapters, gives us an illustration of adultery, and it's in this spiritual form. And I mentioned to you several weeks ago on a Sunday morning about one of the issues with Israel, and when they went into captivity and when they came back, the problem was religious syncretism, where they kind of adopt different principles, different religious ideas into Judaism, and it violates spiritual truth. It violates religious purity, and it violated Judaism. And so we do the same thing today. When Christianity begins to pull in foreign ideas, it goes along the same lines. You no longer have spiritual truth, and that's a form of adultery. And so that's what he's talking about here. And notice that this religious form, and on her forehead was written the name of mystery, Babylon the Great. That's key because of what it relates to. Now I know it gets kind of muddy here a little bit, but hopefully it'll clear up in just a minute. Look at number 3. The Apostle Paul alludes to Nimrod and the specific developments of pantheism, polytheism, and idolatry, all within the context of moral failure. Pantheism is where everything in nature is God. It has some element of God. You're God, I'm God, that wall's God, the trees are God, the animals are God. That's pantheism. You realize that's a lie, right? I knew you did. I just wanted to check, make sure you still awake. Then you have polytheism. Polytheism is where there are many gods. Not so much in nature, but you're a god, I'm a god. Wouldn't you like to be a god? And then idolatry is obviously the worship of other gods rather than the true God. And so pantheism and polytheism are part of idolatry. We could also connect this with paganism.
Wouldn't adultery be worship of things to like statues and things? Or what is considered?
Yeah, it's a broad term. But it's all summed up, Paul does, in the context of moral failure. Okay? Everybody got that?
Yep.
Take you to Romans chapter 1. Notice what he says here. For his invisible attributes, God, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived. They're obvious. They're on open display. Ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. And so we should be able to see that there is a God, that nature isn't a God, but it is part of the creative act of a divine being. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking. They became empty-headed. And their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. In verse 25, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. Now, here's the big question. Who are they? Who are these people? Well, no, not necessarily.
That's unbelievers, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Most people.
Generally speaking, it is unbelievers, but Paul is going back
Oh, yeah.
to a time earlier in history. And he's pointing several things out to us. If you have your Bibles, let's look at the rest of it. Because
Oh, yeah. I
it's an interesting passage, particularly where we're at today in our culture.
So,
So look at verse 26, Romans chapter 1, verse 26 and following.
1:21?
Yes,
26.
Romans 1,
Yes, sir.
chapter 1, verse 26. And I have the ESV. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women, and were consumed with passion for one another. What does that sound like? It sounds like homosexuality. Men committing shameless acts with men, and receiving in themselves the due penalty of their error. So there is a physical consequence. There are problems with this. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, that's a major statement. Go back to Hosea, your people suffer because of lack of knowledge. They do not acknowledge God. God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree, they know the truth, they've heard it, that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. Now, this is all a reference back to Nimrod. And we'll see this come together, but this is the same pattern that is repeated over and over again through humanity, through the ages here. And one of the connections that Christians and others often miss with this passage is that idolatry, or not just idolatry, but homosexuality, polytheism, pantheism, all these are forms of idolatry. Even, notice what I said first, even homosexuality, because the creature is worshipped rather than God. And so the creature, the creation, is exalted. And even though they know better, they choose not to follow him. Right? And so again, all of this is pointing back to this moral depravity of man. And it goes back to the time of Nimrod. And it's not just under human government, but it's the development of his kingdom. And so that's the key again. And so there's this attempt now to bring these different forms of worship under one umbrella, if you will. And so we will try to mix, Nimrod says, we will mix government, the centralized government idea with religion. And so there is a problem when there's not a separation of church and state. Here's number 4. There is a strong possibility that all the people in the pre-Babel period, or Babel period, spoke a Semitic language similar to Hebrew. And here's where it begins, hopefully, to start to all fit together. Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. Literally, look at me, they were of the same lip. Same lip. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And so here they come, and they're all coming together, and they're going to settle in one place. Should that be an issue? It should be, because going back to Adam and going back to Noah, God has told them something different, that they are to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Right? But here they want to come together. Now there's a couple of other things here. One, some would say that there is an error in the scriptures because of what is said in chapter 11 and what is said in chapter 10. In chapter 10, we saw last week how that there was already division among the people. That we see the division of the sons, we see the division of the families that come from that and the different languages. And some would say, but now we see in chapter 11, they were all of one language. Here's what happens a lot in writings, particularly historical narratives. That we're given a piece of information, and then in the next chapter, we're given more information that describes what happened earlier. And so how did we get to, we start asking questions like any good book or any good story, we'll see something in a movie and we'll go, well, I wonder how that got there. And then a little bit later in the movie or in the book, it's explained. You ever seen that before? Same thing happens here. And so Genesis sometimes, because it's a historical narrative, it's a writing, it goes outside the chronological order in order to bring about this thematic kind of understanding. And so this language, again, how do we know that it was probably a Semitic language? It may have been Hebrew or a form of Hebrew, because they all come from one source. We can all trace them back to whom? Who was the leader on the ship, on the boat? Noah. And so we can trace them back to Noah. And there's also another reason, which is a stronger reason. All the names and important places in these passages are in Hebrew. They have Hebrew names and Hebrew meanings. So that's how we know that they probably all spoke the Semitic language. Some people would even say, that's probably what we're going to speak in heaven. I don't know. Could be. And so if you do, just do this. You can practice it now. You ready? All right. If you can do that, you can speak Hebrew. All right. Anyway, that's probably not very nice, is it? There's a reason for language, and the reason that he's pointing out here. Language dates back to the beginning of time. We know Adam had language. And the reason was not just so that Adam could communicate with Eve or other men, but so that man could communicate with God and God could communicate with man. We read in places like Hebrews chapter 1, listen to this. Long ago, and at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. God spoke to our fathers. Right? And then he says, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. So God has a reason for the language in order to communicate back and forth. And so when we look at this, it's telling us that there's this issue developing because now they're not following what God had commanded them to do. They're coming to one place. There's this idea of the development of a kingdom and this centralized government, and Nimrod is the one that's behind it. More than likely, what is really behind Nimrod is the power of Satan. And we're going to see that also. Here's number 5. The people were advancing, we might say, in their technology and towards colonization. Again, this points to the centralized government, and I mentioned to you a moment ago what God had given to Adam and what he had given to Noah. Genesis 1:28 and Genesis 9:1, he told them both the same thing. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And here, we think of technological advances, most people do, as a really good thing, right? It has made, in many ways, life a little easier from a physical standpoint. I don't know about you all, but I think my wife, she does all the laundry. She doesn't let me touch it. And I'm so disappointed. But I bet she would rather do the laundry the way she does it today rather than taking it down by the river and getting it on the rock.
Then you let him do it.
So technology it does help, right? Look at this. Genesis 11:3. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Bitumen is like tar. Okay? And so it's something that came from the ground. Some translations have slime. But it is something that is produced from the earth and that they used in order to make these bricks strong. A couple of things. I asked you a question a while ago when we were in the book of Romans, and in the book of Revelation, who these people were. And now notice, who are these people? And they said to one another, and they said to us, this is coming after Nimrod begins to develop his kingdom, and they said, Allah. Voila, there you go. We've got this little light bulb going off above our head, right? And said, come, let us make bricks. Now, where they were at, the area that they were at, the land was rich with nutrients. It was between the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, and these are not necessarily the same rivers that went during the time of the Garden of Eden, because when the floods came, it changed the entire earth. So we don't know where the Garden of Eden was. But there may have been two rivers that were mighty rivers named Tigris and Euphrates before the flood. Anyway, the area there, we're told that the stones are not really good for building. We're also told that Egyptians and others, when they made bricks, they were sun-baked. Not these. These they used a kiln. And so there's this sense of advancement, if you will. And it makes the bricks stronger in order to make longer lasting buildings that they left. And so there's some advances here that Nimrod is kind of behind. Now, with that, we see this advancing society, and we come to number 6. The Great Tower. We talk about the Tower of Babel, right? The Great Tower would serve as both a political and religious symbol signifying unity, strength, and independence. Give me a second to get that down. Here's where those other passages now begin to come into play. Remember what we saw in Revelation 17? It was this religious form that sought to bring people together. That was a perversion of the truth, or will be a perversion of the truth. And I told you that this pattern goes way back, right? That it was nothing new. Even today, in our culture, there's this idea that, and we all have kind of seen it, and we all kind of fall into it sometimes, is that if you're a Christian, then there are certain conservative ideas that you must have. If you don't have these conservative ideas, then there's something wrong with your Christianity. And oftentimes we have political forces that try to play on that, right? Here's one of my pet peeves. It's not in my notes, I'm just going to give it to you, okay? One of my pet peeves when political seasons roll around, and I hear politicians and they give these long speeches and they paint everything rosy, and then they'll say, and God bless America. Right? Well, that's great. I do want God to bless America, but really, with some of the things that you've just supported, and some of the things that they talk about, they are nowhere near God. And we're asking God's blessing upon some of these ideas. That's just one of my pet peeves. I think it has become a tagline, and that's do they really mean it?
At first, Obama, he wouldn't wait. I didn't notice him saying that very much. God we trust at the end of his speech. Did you notice that?
I think all politicians say it.
No, I mean at the very beginning when he first started, he wasn't saying, because my husband and I were saying, he didn't say God we trust.
We want to take it off the money.
Well, that may be, I don't know, but I
don't
think
either. I
there's a
never heard
lot that use that. Look at this, Genesis 11:4. Then they said, come let us build ourselves a city. There it is again. Let us build ourselves a city. And a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And so, it is this idea that someone is leading this movement, this kingdom, and it goes back to Nimrod. And so he is saying to them, hey, I've got this idea. And when you want to sell something, when you want to move people, and sometimes it's a form of manipulation, then if you can make someone else believe it's their idea, it goes over a whole lot better. And so, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower up to heaven. And so some translations have to reach to heaven, but the words to reach are not in the original manuscripts. And the way it actually reads is to build a tower unto heaven. And so, go ahead.
They said the beach weed be spread all over. They never did know spread all over the world.
That's a great question. It goes back to Genesis 1:28 and Genesis 9:1. Because remember, that's what God's idea, the implication is this, that there not be one centralized government, but that there would be groups of people throughout the world where they are dispersed, populating the earth, operating under different entities, different forms of government, not one. And so that's why they understood. They're all coming to this one place, to the plains of Shinar, and they don't want to go. And so Nimrod is kind of drawing them together. And then this building, remember I said it, the original manuscripts do not have to reach, but to build a tower unto heaven. To build a tower unto heaven is not so much that they could get to God. there's some other understandings here.
Mine says reaches to the heavens.
Reaches to the heavens.
Mine-
Well-
Mine says, whose top is in the heavens.
Whose top is in the heavens. Well, here's what it actually means. It means dedicated unto heaven, in the sense that there's the angelic host kind of helping them and moving them, and it's under the guise of spirituality. Right? Think about it. Remember we said that there's this merging together of political forces and religious forces or forms? He started out talking about this kingdom of Nimrod, this centralized government, and now here's the religious aspect. Because really, do the governments care much about heaven? No, they don't.
Mine says reaches within the sky.
And, well, there's a reason here. There's this mingling together of the two, because when you have political power and religious power, or you have the elements there, you can control a lot of folks. It is a sense of power that drives Nimrod. And so this power is a symbol. And the symbol is of this might and majesty of people. Look, if we all come together, can't you just hear it now? Really can't, not just can we get along, but if we've got this plan, and if we all just stick together, and you come over here, and you come over here, and we work together, and we build this tower, we can build this kingdom, we can build this nation. We. There's no God. We become God. And that was Nimrod. Nimrod, from Babylonian history, we know that Nimrod was deified in their writings. He was, one of the names that is used for him is Marduk. And so, as he's deified, this is what a lot of leaders throughout history have done. They actually believe that once that they have been appointed or come to power, that they actually become God. There is examples of Caesar worship throughout Rome, and dating back before that to other governments. Even Alexander the Great and Nebuchadnezzar and those before them viewed themselves as gods.
Not the Egyptian.
The pharaohs, yeah. There's nothing new. Again, there's this pattern that developed with Nimrod. And so if we can bring the political forces and the religious forces together, or forms, then we got it made. Because now we're bigger than God. That's it. Because what does it say? Even though they knew the truth, they did not acknowledge God, and they shifted away. They moved away from God. Right?
And it's that way even today. And it's just, one thing I don't understand is they, the atheists and all, if they say, well, I don't want that, then okay,
It's
we don't
okay.
have it. But we don't
Have
have
that
a
right.
leg to stand on. Just like that cross, that those two beings just happen to look like a cross, but, you know, they want that down. And, okay, yeah, some of it.
You bring up a great point. Okay? Let me point something out to you that I hope will encourage. One, what does it matter to atheists if they believe in a God or not? If they why don't they even care? Because in their minds, if he doesn't exist, he doesn't have any purpose or matter in their life. But it really angers them, right? I have to go back to Romans chapter 1 and read the last passage again. That's why it bothers them, because in them, within their own minds, they know the truth. And that's why it disturbs them. But here's what should encourage us. I can't imagine them if the towers came down and one of the I-beams looked like a crescent and a moon. They probably wouldn't want to touch it then. They wouldn't want to say anything, right? But yet, because something looks like a cross, Christianity or Christians are open to all kinds of thoughts, right? Which should tell us that maybe we're on the right track.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And maybe we're drawing closer to the time of the return of Christ than people actually realize. And so if you want to look at it that way, the more heat we get, the more it solidifies our position and our belief in the Scriptures. And so, something to think about.
Yeah, that is a good point.
All right. Here's the last thing. Number 7. God's evaluation demanded intervention because at the very core of mankind's being resides wickedness. Within Calvinism, there's one of the elements that talks about depravity. Man is totally depraved. I saw something today. John MacArthur apparently said something recently about if man could lose his salvation, he would. You think about it, and it makes a lot of sense.
Uh-huh.
If we could lose our salvation, we would,
Yeah.
because within our very being, we're evil, we're wicked.
True, yeah.
I don't understand that.
I don't
understand.
Because I think, does it mean if man wanted to lose? I don't want to lose.
No.
Okay, then what's it?
It means our very nature. Our nature apart from God.
But we
is
become
wicked.
new creatures in heaven's image.
I agree, we become new
I have no
creatures.
desire to lose my
Okay, think about it.
No, we're not just talking about
It's one of those
those
things.
salvation.
All right. Genesis 11, 5-8. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. We don't know how long it took, but God apparently gave them enough time to build this tower. Did you run out, Doug?
No, it's still going.
Okay. I talked too long for
No, I was laughing at the tower, getting almost up and then,
Right. Well, apparently, they came a long way with it. And God gives them enough time. And this is not out of character for God. It reveals the character of God, that God is long-suffering and He will delay in order for man to turn. So
Amen.
there comes a point that He's had enough. That when He draws a line, there's really a line. Okay? And the Lord said, behold, they are one people and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. That's an interesting statement. This is only the beginning. And so, knowing that man left to his own will continue to draw further and further and further away from God, we will become more and more wicked. And nothing that they purpose to do will now be impossible for them. So now, this supports the idea of this advancing society. That technically, even though their building, we think, may have been crude, it probably wasn't very crude at all, because we know that ancient people were able to do some remarkable things. Right? Come, let us go down, and therefore confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. And so, what God had already commanded them to do, He gave them an opportunity to repent and to do on their own, but they would not. And so, when He says it's enough, and He comes and He fulfills His will, even through the act of judgment. And that's what this is. mankind is free, but with freedom also comes responsibility. And that's oftentimes kind of what our culture misses today. Because no one, I want the freedom, but I don't want to be responsible for it. And that's illogical, isn't it?
One of the things that just really didn't just a second ago, you know, God eventually made them do what he first asked them to do.
That's right.
And he's gonna do the same thing
Every knee will bow.
to us.
That's exactly right. He will have his will.
Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess.
See, that's why the air gets so thin the higher you go.
Do what now?
So maybe that's why the air gets so thin the higher you go. And you lose, you can't think and all good to be.
That's true. We do kind of lose our senses, don't we? All right. Just to close this out, Nimrod is creating this one government. And he's doing it politically, and he's doing it religiously. Remember, I told you that the building here is what represents the spiritual rebellion against God, because look at us, let us do this, let us rise up. And the power behind it is the angelic forces, if you will, the satanic forces, demonic forces. And it is saying here, we don't need God, we can develop our own spirituality, and we really can. In my notes, I have this question. Let's consider a couple of things. One, does our rapidly expanding technology make everything better?
I
No.
think if my computers went down today at work and it was cold.
I don't think technology net. Go
I
ahead.
talked to about 50 people a day that will tell you that they hadn't helped them a bit.
It's harder.
Well, some things in life get easier, but it sure does make some of our sins a lot easier to cover up, doesn't it?
That's right. Well, I know you can't have too much on that.
God has his way of
He does, but we in our mind think, I can do this, I can do these things in secret, and nobody will ever know.
I saw a t-shirt the other day. It said, "It's all fun until the video goes on the internet."
The video goes on the internet.
So here's another question. Have we become so sophisticated that we have become less evil as a people?
Wow.
Yeah, we're growing worse. Right. Look at this last. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth. There's this similarity between the words Babel and confused. And when we trace it all back again, we can go back to Revelation chapter 17. And what was the name of the mystery woman, the name of the mystery religion?
Babylon.
Babylon. From which is called Babel. And so, let me show you this. Archaeologists have uncovered these ruins in Babylon, and this is called a ziggurat. This is believed what they had built. And so you'll notice that as it rises up, there will be stages, and each stage gets a little higher. It's a place of worship, all right? And so you worship here, you get a little higher, you worship. So these are ziggurats. That's a drawing of it. That's
In my
the,
mind, it was just a straight up.
yeah, that's what a lot of people think. But this is actually in Iraq,
Oh, wow.
and they have reconstructed
Oh.
from the foundation here what they have found. And they're doing this a lot in the Middle East. There are different ancient cities where they're rebuilding the cities.
Flash back
They're
to
kind
that
of
other
interesting.
one, please. Flash back to that other
The drawing,
drawing, please. Shoot on
The idea had gardens and
Does the Quran have anything like that in it about the Tower of Babel and?
I don't, I don't know. Teresa used to teach some about the Quran. You don't know. But there's a lot of the things in the Quran are actually taken from the Bible and the Old Testament and Judaism, and they're perverted, but they take some of the things from there. But I don't know about the Tower of Babel. That's an interesting question.
Well, I was thinking, if Iraq is reconstructing it, they're Muslim and.
Well, they're reconstructing many of the ruins. The Babylon, the ancient Babylon that we're talking about here, and the Babylon in Revelation chapter 17, it is simply a picture of what is to come. Some believe that the Antichrist will actually be centered in Babylon or in that area. We don't know. But when it talks about Babylon in chapter 17, it's talking about the religious aspect of the Antichrist government.